Okay, hello, and today we're going to be talking uh, about global Torah change conspiracy in the final part, when we explain if the Jews actually changed the Torah, as most of the Muslims insist. We'd like to know how they can do it, okay? In the first video, we find out, based on Muslim sources, what they changed, supposedly, and when. Now we're going to figure out how it could be possibly done. Right, so let's...
Probably not too hard to do.
Yeah, the Jews are special people, right? So they can
Oh, yeah,
do
yeah.
on, right? So the main question is, $2 billion question is, what was the Torah in the possession of the Jews in Yathrib, which is commonly named as Medina, known as Medina. Question is, like, it's the Torah is which Muhammad actually maybe held in his hands, maybe saw it for sure, and what the Torah is, what after Quran is confirming. So let's check it out. They have three scenarios. The first scenario, the Torah was always the same everywhere since the time of Moses until now. So that's pretty simple scenario, but we have to still look into it. So since we have all Torah manuscripts for the first century of when Islam was born, like Islam was born in the 7th century, but we have manuscripts predates the one manuscript, basically two manuscripts, Codex Leningradus and Codex Aleppo Codex. They are dated 10th century after Muhammad, 300 years or so, 400 years, no more than that. But everything else, which is Syriac Peshitta, Latin Vulgate, Codex Alexandrius, Codex Sinaiticus, and Codex Vaticanus, and also Dead Sea Scrolls, that all of them are predates the Prophet Muhammad existence.
Yeah, and the one on the very left is the Dead Sea Scrolls, right?
Yeah. So it's 125 years before Christ was born. So it means, but when we look at the timing, and for over 2,000 years, we could compare the Torahs in Hebrew, because Dead Sea Scrolls give us a unique opportunity to actually look at the Hebrew letters and compare with the Hebrew letters of Codex Leningradus or Codex of Aleppo Codex and today's Torah everywhere on the planet Earth in Hebrew. So, and we find out how many of them are different, what the difference are, what similarities are. But nevertheless, that's what we have. I call it Torah's umbrella, and Quran was right somewhere almost in the middle of that umbrella. Well, based on simple comparison of the story narrations, we can tell that all Dead Sea Scrolls, Septuagint, Vulgate, Peshitta, they're all compatible with today's Torahs in our Bible. Well, here's what we have. The fact is that massive amount of contradictions found in the Quran, whether comparing it to the Torah of the 3rd century BC or 21st century AD, doesn't matter. So we have incompatible stories all over the place, thousands of them. Well, the claim of the Quran is that, basically what we see, the Quran and Hadith and Tafsir indicates that uncorrupted Torah was available in the days of Muhammad, and the Quran confirmed the Torah, which is really strange when looking at the fact, right? So, but comparing this claim with the facts, reality is we have to conclude the Quran is a fake news, definitely. It cannot be trusted at all, and therefore the Bible or the Torah is only standing word of God.
It's kind of the original fake news then.
It is original fake news. I'm sorry. Sorry, CNN. You know the first one. That's for sure. Well, okay. First scenario, simple, obvious. Every Christian should believe in it. Every Jew should believe in it. Most won't believe that, but it is so simple, so self-evident. Nevertheless, we're gonna still talking about other options. So there's the second scenario. The Torah in Medina was the same as all other Torahs in the world from the time of Moses till the 7th century AD. but it was corrupted after the Jews met with Muhammad. And let's see this scenario is how plausible it is. So we know from an article of Bassam Zawadi from previous video that, for example, this guy, Muqatil bin Sulaiman, mentioned that the leaders of the Jews in Medina, he's very specific, he said who, nationality, religious background, and geographical place. So the leaders of the Jews in Medina erased the description of traits of Muhammad, peace be upon him, from the Torah. Okay, so he gives a specific timing. So here's what we have. The Jews changed the Torah in Medina, which has been called Yathrib, after meeting with Muhammad. Yeah, makes sense. Then they left Arabia and convinced all other Jews in the world to change their Torahs in two places, generally speaking, that do, not places, but in maybe two aspects. First of all, it's removing the name of Muhammad everywhere they find it. And second of all, they have to corrupt every single story of Old Testament prophets and patriarchs in order to make them different from the Quran. I don't understand. I couldn't guess any other reason for the Jews corrupt the story of Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, Joseph, Jacob's story. For what? Just simply to be different from the Quran, I think, right? Supposedly they did it. Well, we have logistical problem and we have to look at the map, right? So we could see, let's say, the Medina, Khaybar, and Jerusalem as the center, first supposedly a center of the Jewish, the Torah being present in the synagogues in the cities. Then Muhammad migrated to Medina, to Yathrib. He encountered with the Jews, and then Jews, they didn't like what they look at Muhammad, they find him in the Torah, his description, supposedly they find his description in Torah, and they decided to corrupt their Torahs to remove the name of Muhammad and his description from the Torah.
That's reasonable.
Yeah, I know. Well, number one, they have to be like really not God-fearing people at all. So if they tampered with the Torah scroll, it means they know they will go to hell for that. But they did it either way.
Yeah. I don't think the Jews really value the Torah, right?
Yeah, that's strange statement. If they didn't value, can try to tell the Jews now they don't value the Torah,
especially Torah scroll.
Oh yeah, it's almost like an idol in many respects. Like they like really a relic. Like you cannot even touch it with unclean hands, or you cannot do it. So it's like really strange relationship between the Jews and the Torah scrolls in the synagogue, because they have to be a special place all the time.
Yeah, you can't even touch it with your finger when you read it. And
yeah, that's true.
And it's so expensive to make.
Oh,
it takes a long time to make.
Yeah, a year and a half to rewrite the Torah, like a full-time job. Can you imagine the price to pay?
And the time you have to prepare the skin. I think that takes a long time.
Oh, that's another one. And the ink and and all this, special tools to write, pens, whatever.
And the Torah is still actually regarded as more authoritative than the rest of the Old Testament.
Yeah, absolutely. Right.
So especially the Torah scroll.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, again, let's say what this scenario actually implied, that the Jews corrupted the Torah in Medina and made it the prototype for all other corrupted Torahs in the known world. So they did one copy and then they use it as a prototype.
If only they had Uthman's power.
Or to collect all the Torahs and rewrite them, burn them,
and burn the rest of them.
Well, only Muslims can do it. Well, you see, the Muslims could do it. Jews couldn't do it.
It's like Uthman, but a grassroots movement. You got to get everybody in.
Yeah,
from the bottom up, not the top down.
The problem is, to do that, you have to be really centralized. Like you have to have the central power.
Yeah.
But
when you think of the Jews in the 7th century, do you think of them having a lot of power?
not centralized power.
Political power.
No, I mean, like, they can have political power within their own synagogues.
No, I know. I'm just.
But I mean, like, how there is no communications like as we have now because they live in different. It's not only a Roman Empire; it's already been partially divided in different provinces. I think
They'd be in Afghanistan. They'd be in.
Oh yeah, they've been in India,
Europe,
I believe.
North
Yeah.
Africa, Ethiopia.
Anyway, so what will happen is the first destination, natural destination, the Jews of Yathrib, they run away to Khaybar. And they convinced Khaybarites, Jews, they are, by the way, they've been 7 tribes, 7 cities in the Khaybar, and I'm pretty sure they have at least 7 synagogues. It means they have at least 7 scrolls. So they have to convince all of them, all the rabbis, all the scribes, to start working and deleting the name of Muhammad from the scrolls. Just imagine the work should be done to find them and to cut down the pieces of skin or whatever animal skin and replace them. Make sure you didn't see the patches anymore. But
they'd have to create a whole new scroll.
I'm just trying to figure out what minimize the damage, because to create the scroll, they will be one and a half year late.
It's funny too, because you'd also have to count, because they have a system when they're writing, especially by that point, where they're, you have to count. They would count the number of words in the scroll, and they'd have a middle word.
Oh.
So they know, and they would design it differently.
Mm-hmm.
So you would have to count. You have to count it, right? So you got all the words, things like that. So and that's not the only marker. So you have different markers like that are set to. Well, what's the middle word if you change the things about any passage?
Yeah, I don't know.
It's insane. You gotta pass that on to, okay, change it at this.
So yeah, we're talking about technicalities, which is like crazy by itself.
Yeah.
But before you be technical, of course, you have to actually make people believe you. Agree to tamper the word of God. I mean, this, for example, Jews migrated eventually from Khaybar and Medina, and they convinced the Jews in Jerusalem to corrupt the Torah, and most likely, I don't know how well they know each other to trust. I mean, but how can you even trust your friend who said, let's change the word of God? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and go to hell together, right? Sure, I don't think it's a good prospect. So anyway, so we're talking about a massive amount of changes, and you have to actually persuade so many rabbis and scribes, make sure no Torah with the name of Muhammad will be existed, right? And here we have the communities of Jewish communities spread all over the place, from Spain, Persia, Britain, and Egypt, beyond, and whatever. So now we're talking about a massive amount of synagogues. Let's say I just show a few for the sake, all right? So in the Roman Empire, and as the Jews from Medina influence all other Jews to corrupt the Torah according to the new revision by removing the name of Muhammad and changing all the stories of the prophets to be different from the Quran. And idea is like how fast you can spread this information. You cannot just say it with a letter. You have to actually bring the Torah scroll with you. So you have to have a prototype giving simultaneously many prototypes of the Torah going around different synagogues. Otherwise, it will take like 1,000 years. And you don't want to do it because of Muhammad's army on your back, right? So you have to prepare the Jews not to accept the Muhammad army, like Muhammad as a prophet. So you must change it within like fast, pronto.
Also, another element is the Christian missionaries keep spreading.
That's another one.
So you have to catch up with them.
You have to catch up with them. You have to. It's like it's running against the time. I could say now maybe with the printers and Word document you can change pretty fast the textual, but at that time with the pens and the ink and that's gonna be funny. Well, as you mentioned, it's not enough to change only Torah in the possession of the Jews in Europe, let's say. But let it be Roman Empire, Europe, and North Africa. We have to convince actually all Christians to apply exactly the same changes in the Bibles, which is Old Testament, of course, right? And well, we have a problem here because the Christians' Bibles being a lot different languages, right? It's a Greek, Syriac, Latin, the Coptic Bibles, which is different language anyway, and who knows what else. So they have tons of translations available.
Well, I wonder who did all the translation work too. Because you got the prototype. If you got the prototype coming out of Medina, what language? Hebrew?
Okay, so it was a Hebrew, but now you have to show somebody who knows a Hebrew from Christian side.
They don't know it.
They have to
find
it.
Almost nobody knows it. At that time, almost nobody knew Hebrew.
From a Christian side?
Yeah. Almost none of the only Origen in the 3rd century and Jerome in the 4th, 5th century.
Well, I think the Jews could start helping them out, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, the Christians would welcome the Jews.
Oh, yeah, and they for sure whatever goes with the brothers, right?
Yeah.
The Christ killers forget about it. We just
I think there were lots of Zionists back then, right?
And they should be Zionists. Sure. So now we have a very strange situation, right? So the Jews corrupted their Torahs and synagogues, but now they influence all the Christians to corrupt the Old Testament, according to the new revision, right? So they're removing the name of Muhammad, changing all the stories of the Old Testament prophets to be different from the Quran. So there's a massive amount of, as you said, translations from Hebrew into the Greek, into the Coptic, Syriac, Latin.
Yeah, Ethiopic.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
There's so many. There's Georgian.
And guess what?
Armenian.
Armenian for sure, yeah. So can you imagine like the rate of speed, how every Christian bishop and head of the orders of monks and what, right? So they have possession of the Bible in their places, and only they could read it, and they decided to corrupt it. Especially important is then they change the name of the first book of the Torah from Genesis or
from Muhammad
to Genesis, right?
Yeah.
Because as we talked before, the first book of the Torah must be called Muhammad because of verse 1 and 2. It's about Muhammad being messenger of Allah, and since Muhammad is the first word of the first verse of the first chapter, it should be named. The entire book should be named by the Muhammad. Right?
Yeah, if people don't know watching this, the Jewish Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, the names of the books go by the first, especially in the Torah at least. The first word of the book is the name of the book. So the first word in Hebrew for in the beginning is Bereshit. So they would call what we call in English, we'll call it Genesis, which comes from the Greek name, from the Septuagint. But the Hebrew name is Bereshit.
Yeah, so it means, as I play back a little bit, so you have to remove the word, change the name of the first book, and remove two important verses about Muhammad and his characters and the characters of Muslims, and somehow decided to talk about creation. What a bizarre story, right? Talk about creation instead of talking about Muhammad being not rude and not scream on the markets. And
seems more important. Seems more important to talk about Muhammad.
I know, it's the most important thing, right? But they decided to corrupt the Torah and talk about the creation of the universe. Well, definitely, we see the problem here. Okay, so we have two logistical, one historical, and one archaeological problem. The Jews from Yathrib convinced all the Jews, so that's logistical problem. Then convinced all the Christians, so the same thing. And now we have a historical and archaeological problem, but the first historical comes in because.
So wait, just before you go on, you forgot the Samaritans.
Oh, Samaritans too. Oh, yeah, that's.
They also have their own Pentateuch and their own Samaritan language.
They just We know the difference between the Pentateuch and the Torah in Hebrew, and they have like irreconcilable difference in the naming, especially.
Yeah.
So the rest is more or less the same, but the names are different. But somehow they agreed together. They changed the name of Muhammad for sure, exactly the same, right? And of course, we have a historical problem, which is the Jews, Christians, and Muslim sources must have evidence, some kind of evidence of the conspiracy was going on. It means some rabbi sending a letter to another rabbi or explaining what should be done, or at least to call the meeting, very important meeting. And then rabbi to the bishop to the bishop. And the Muslims, because the problem is now with this kind of global Torah change conspiracy, it will take a lot of time. But Muslims' armies were spreading very fast. Within 100 years, they occupy entire North Africa, Iberian Peninsula, almost part of the France, a lot of places and that there is not enough time for the Jews to corrupt the Torahs in North Africa for sure, or in Egypt, especially in Egypt and in Jerusalem, or in Damascus, because it was conquered within a few years after Muhammad died, right? So, and yet nobody caught them red-handed with trying to corrupt the Torah. And definitely it should be more Jews and Christians who converted to Islam based on they uncorrupt the Torah with the name of Muhammad in it. Okay. So they should have been having this as an evidence, at least somewhere in the Muslim sources. They should talk about not necessarily Abdullah ibn Salam or Kabul Akbar, but other ones from other places and other times basically said, yes, we should all accept Muhammad as a prophet because he's mentioned in our Torah, and that's what we find him, right? So, but we don't have this stuff. So somehow the Muslim sources, Jewish and Christian sources, have nothing to say about massive conspiracy going on for removing the name of Muhammad Torah and changing all the stories of all prophets from the Torah. Well, conclusion is the all manuscripts are of the Torah are virtually the same. All of them predates the birth of Muhammad. All Bibles today are virtually the same, and all ancient manuscripts and all modern day Bibles are virtually the same. So this is obvious. They are all telling stories exactly the same. And
none of them mention Muhammad, eh?
Yeah, they never mentioned Muhammad. So we talk about something before Muhammad, and they have no mention of Muhammad. So, and even so, they decided to corrupt the story somehow. And ancient manuscripts, what we find, they like odd one, and it should have name of Muhammad somewhere, but we just missed them. But just to change that without at the 7th century, 8th century, 9th century, without like Twitter with the X and the Facebook and Dropbox and the cloud and whatever, right? So it's live without electronic like emails, phone calls, Zoom meetings with the rabbis, with the bishops, because that's how you can do it fast. Never mind, you have to convince them. It's not enough to hold the meeting between bishops and rabbis and between whatever, but you have to actually convince them. So even in our, let's say, even today, we decided to change something, one word, okay, in the Torah, in the very beginning. Let's say we will add in the very beginning, so the word very in Hebrew. And then we're going to reach out every Christian priest, every Christian, and a pastor and a rabbi. Scholar, and said, listen, I think we should put that word into that. Very, in the very beginning, instead of in the beginning, in the very beginning. So I wonder, what do you think? How will we succeed? And if we will succeed, how many decades it will take? And amount of efforts, just one word will take. Like, I don't think we could succeed 100% because somebody will always have somebody say like, oh, I have to add the word or remove the word. So what significance? There is no significance, right?
Yeah.
And if it is significance, they will have more resistance, way more than.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. So, and if you think about all the stories in the name Muhammad and the description of someone prophesied, it's crazy.
It is very big significance, and to convince somebody who feared to upset God and to be wrong with God, to actually go into that deliberate corruption, it's like it's not a chance, I should say, right? So we cannot do it today. There is no way to do it, to accomplish that without leaving any trace of the previous Torahs when it said in the beginning. So within the 10 years, let's say, every single Torah in every language will say in the very beginning. So now we have to hunt down every single Bible on the planet and make sure it will be burned or destroyed. Mm-hmm. So not even one Bible with the older version of Genesis 1:1 will survive. That's exactly what we see now, because we don't have even one Torah where we have name of Muhammad or story of the prophet exactly like the Quran. So like not even one. So they did a good job, supposedly for destroying everything, right?
I just thought of the Eastern Orthodox. They kind of see the Septuagint as inspired. Mm-hmm. So they'll accept the Septuagint over the Hebrew Old Testament.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
So how would the Jews with their Hebrew Old Testament proposing a change in the Hebrew Old Testament? How are they going to win over all the Byzantine Empire? It's
more than
it's just funny. The more every aspect of it.
So we just show like how impossible it is to do that, right? But we're just coming to archaeological problem, right? Mm-hmm. So the Dead Sea Scrolls, and here is what we talk about: Bereshit. In the beginning, Bereshit. So as you see, these verses, let's say 5 or 6 verses, we survive almost everything what we need to know. Survive. A few other words were missing. I put blocks in it. So, but the rest is perfectly the same. So we're talking about 700 years before Muhammad. The verse 1 of the first chapter of Genesis is still written as the Bereshit, and actually that's how it sounds. Bereshit bara Elohim hashamayim ve'et haaretz. There's nothing about Muhammad.
Maybe in verse 5 it said, and there was evening and Muhammad one day.
Yeah. And it was evening and Muhammad, whatever.
I don't think you can fit that whole.
We could fit that.
Kabal Akbar's verses in there.
Yeah,
it's not the first 2 verses either.
And then they somehow go back to creation again, right? So that's what's now I'm saying, based on this bizarre explanation of Kabal Akbar, which we in details talk about it the previous video. I could have clearly said that he was an opportunist and a liar, and he lied to the gullible Muslims, the Sahabis of Muhammad, and they had no idea. That's their problem. They should have checked Kabal Akbar. Can you imagine if they find out that he's lying to them? What could have been done to him? But definitely he died peacefully with very famous guy, because he tickled the ears of these Muslims, because he told them something they really love to hear, that Muhammad indeed was prophesied in the Torah so clearly that even this rabbi, that honorable rabbi, Kabal Akbar, who could never lie, of course, sure, we trust this guy, right? We trust the Jews, what they say to the Muslims, right? So he was clearly saying Muhammad was there, and that's why he became a believer. Well, it's not. The bad news for Muslims, he lied. So it means the scenario 2, again, Quran is the fake news. Is fake news. So there is a scenario number 3 we have to look through. So the Torah in Medina, Yathrib, was different from all other Torahs in the world. That was proposed by one of the Muslim debater of mine. And let's talk about it.
So that tells you that's kind of like their best alternative. That's all they got left.
Yeah, they have nothing left. They have only this part left, because, of course, generally, scenario number 1 make the Islam is fake news right away, Quran fake news. Statement number 2 make even worse. Like the Muslim who said that the Torah been corrupted by the Jews is like really in a trouble. There could be trouble, like we're called it's illogical. It doesn't make sense at all. It's even mockable from outside, right? That kind of idea. There's another one which could be more or less correct, maybe. So we're going to look at it. So it's required that scenario number 3 required that the majority of the Jews would have changed the Torah in Jerusalem at least 700 years before Muhammad by removing the name of Muhammad and by corrupting the stories of Old Testament prophets for no apparent reason. Okay, why have to remove the name of Muhammad for 700 years before he appeared? It's funny because they kept Isaiah 53 intact, as we know it. And that was many Christians, most of the Christians used to prove Christ to be Messiah.
Yeah, it's if you're going to change the prophecies because you're worried about, I don't know, what
future, whatever future holds, right?
I mean, they're not worried about because they just interpret it differently.
Yeah, they interpret it differently, exactly.
Like the rabbinical Jews now, they say it's the nation of Israel, so it's not.
Oh yeah, they have no problem. Why we have to remove it? And definitely before Christ, they should remove it. And same thing before Muhammad, they shouldn't remove it. What's the reason, right?
Right.
But it's also a minority of the Jews in Jerusalem preserved the true Torah and eventually went to Yathrib, which is Medina. In this Torah, the name of Muhammad was preserved, and the stories of prophets were written exactly as. In this Torah, the name of Muhammad was preserved, and the stories of prophets were written exactly as in the Quran. So they removed his name after meeting with Muhammad and corrupted the story of the prophets, every single story of the prophets, to make them different from the Quran and exactly the same as the Torah has been, which had been corrupted 700 years before. So we're talking about how many generations of the rabbis for 700 years.
So that would actually mean that they're matching it to the way everybody else had corrupted it.
Yeah.
And they waited until Muhammad?
To actually, instead of just being hooray, we finally met the guy whom we're looking for.
Why would they preserve it in contrast to the rest of the Jewish community in the rest of the world?
Because they're
they're faithful. They want him to come. They so want him to come.
Yeah, but yet we talk.
And yet, when they meet him, they reject it.
Before it's grandfathers of those Jews. So it was a wicked generation of Yathribian Jews in the days of Muhammad who decided to turn their face against from Muhammad. But all other generations previously.
Why did they change the stories?
Yeah, that's another story which nobody's talking about it.
Because it's nothing to do with any. The stories are. Yeah, it's funny because the global Torah conspiracy is really about the name and description of Muhammad because that's what they mention. They never mention in their sources, as we looked at in the Psalms of Wadi article. They never mention the stories.
Yeah, nothing.
Or at least if they mention it once, it's like generic. It doesn't refer to anything specific.
Yeah.
So why do you have to change it thousands of ways? Because it's thousands details. Then like you preserved all of that, and then we'll just follow everybody else.
So here's a chart I created. So let's say it was Moses and about 1300 BC, maybe 1400 BC. For 1,000 years, they kind of preserve it, and then they decided, you know what? Majority of the Jews said, nope, we're going to remove that Muhammad ibn Abdullah, who will be born in Mecca, who migrated to Taiba, whose dominion will be Sham. That exact verse will be removed from the Torah. But the few said, no, we're going to be faithful to the word of God, and we're going to keep it. And they just eventually moved to Medina, to Yathrib. So then it's very easy for Muslims to say, all your Septuagint, Dead Sea Scrolls, all codexes, Sinaiticus, Alexandrius, Vaticanus and Masoretic texts and all the Tanakhs today, they're all corrupt because it was been corrupted before. Very important. Why 300 BC? Because Septuagint and some of the parts of Septuagint and Dead Sea Scrolls were written after that. So they have to
Samaritan Pentateuch was 2nd century BC as well.
Yeah. So they have to say, well, I guess the main change happens before that. So I said, okay, 300 BC, maybe, why not? But then, of course, the Jews of Medina changed it, and it became, there is no more good Torah on the planet Earth. So it implies that scenario number 3 implies that it was the Jews would have 2 different copies of the Torah at least 700 years before Muhammad. So it's almost they have a Quranic version of the Torah alongside with the Torah version of the Torah. And it's been in coexistence for 700 years. But, so what happened is, because as the Jews were spreading out, they carry on everywhere the corrupt version of the Torah. The bad Jews were called bad Jews, right? And the good Jews actually, they moved to the Medina, to Yathrib, I should say. Mm-hmm. So the bad copies of the Torah already been spread out before Christianity started and New Testament was written. So in that case, it's very easy because you have only maybe 2 copies of one good Torah and bad Torah existed in Jerusalem, and then they start giving the copies by itself, like spreading their own copies over time, over centuries. And we have this only situation when Muhammad migrated to Medina and they just corrupted the Torah in Medina. And this Torah, well, I ask Muslims, do you have any piece from that Torah, like any size of document? Of course not. So I said, okay, well, how you can prove its existence? Well, but let's say if you're going to keep going with this idea, so the Jews finally standardized the Torah. There is no more Medinan Torah on the planet Earth. It's all corrupt Torah, bad Torah. And I think the other rabbis could have told them, hey, we told you so before. You remember? Our ancestors said we should remove the name of Muhammad 700 years before. It took you so long. But finally, you came on board. Thank you. So now they standardize the Torah. Every Torah since 700 AD became bad. And it's only one bad Torah. Well, here's another one, right? But the problem is, the 2 problems. The one problem is basically then if...
I think there are many problems.
Well, yeah. Yes. I tried to make at least like...
keep it simple.
Keep it simple if possible. Number one, the problem with Muslims actually and the Quran and the Quran is because the Muslims will have to agree with the Jews in the time of Jesus and Jesus himself and his apostles have no clue that they read corrupt, utterly, totally corrupted Torah from every synagogue in Nazareth or Bethlehem or Jerusalem, because the bad Jews already corrupted the Torah. So Jesus didn't know he was reading from the corrupt Torah. Apostles has no idea. So the New Testament based on the bad, corrupted Torah. But the Quran said that apostles of Jesus, of Isa al-Masih, became victorious. And they've been true helper of Allah and whatever. So they've been correct. But how they could be correct if the New Testament based on the bad, corrupted Torah? So there is no way for sure the no good offshoot from the bad tree ever happens, right? So that's number one problem, which no Muslims ever think about it, because by condemning the Torah being corrupt, and let's say in Jerusalem and almost everywhere except Khaybar and Medina, in Yathrib, 100, 200, 300 years before Jesus, it doomed entire Christians, no matter what the sect is. Catholic, Orthodox, Assyrian, Protestant, we're all doomed because we put our trust in an utterly corrupt Torah, as apostles did, as a Christ did. He never took the Torah scroll and said, it's all corrupt, I don't want to read it, right? So he never said that. But then there's another problem. If the Medinan Torah was different from Septuagint Dead Sea Scrolls, then Allah actually sent the Quran only to bring Jews in Medina and Khibar to Islam, but not Jews and the Christians in the rest of the Middle East and the Roman Empire. Consequently, it will be impossible to use all these verses, like there's a Muhammad in the Torah, right? To convey a message that Allah is the same author of the Torah and that the Quran was sent to confirm it, because Quran is not confirming the bad Torah. It's only confirming the Medina, which is good Torah. But it means it's only rabbis in Medina and Haybar could have realized that Muhammad is a messenger. Any other Christian and Jews from other
anywhere else, I mean, you have Abdullah bin Salam, the rabbi who became a companion Muhammad in Medina. So, like we talked about in the other video, when we're going through the article, so he's in Medina. He supposedly has this Medinan pure Torah scroll.
Yeah.
So how is his testimony going to be relevant for, like he says, Muhammad's in the Torah. How is that going to be relevant for anybody else who has a different Torah?
No relevance.
Who cares about him?
Only for him and for his people around him. But what I'm saying, it's Allah is basically very local. He sent the Quran to confirm local Torah in Medina, in Yathrib, or whatever, in Haybar, but not everywhere else, right? So the Jews and Christians who had the corrupted Torah, supposedly, should refuse any arguments from the Quran until Muslims prove it that the book is corrupted. But how we can prove it? Have no evidence. And Torah in Medina being changed or destroyed, and they say we don't have anything to prove it. So, okay, you don't have now, you never had before. So it means for every other places you reach as the Muslims in the Roman Empire at that time, or North Africa, you had no chance to convert any Jew or Christians, unless by the sword. There's no persuasion. And Allah didn't think about it, because he said bluntly, I sent the Quran to confirm the Torah. Well, you didn't, because Torah was corrupt, but he didn't say the Torah was corrupt. So it is a big dilemma for Muslims to think this, how they reconcile that. And of course, they don't think about it. That's why they don't worry about it. And well, here's what we have to see, because Muslims insist that the Torah of Moses was reliable, and then the Quran confirms it. This means that every story of the prophets in the Quran would have matched identically to the Torah of Moses. So we're talking about the Torah of Moses, which given to Moses 13 or 1400 BC, right? Now, regardless of the Torah in Medina being different or being the same in relation to all other Torahs in the known world, Muslims must logically explain why the Jews at any point in time would have corrupted every single story of the Prophet and Patriarchs, and of course removed the name of Muhammad in their Torah. Well,
the stories are the killer one. It's even more than Muhammad for sure.
Yeah, but I could see why the Jews somehow they want to remove the name of Muhammad, but why? But why to insist that Joseph was 17 years old instead of...
Oh, it's interesting. I had this thought as you're talking, that I hadn't thought of this before. We're all acknowledging, like, there's textual variance in different ancient versions, meaning different ancient translations.
Yeah.
As well as sometimes also Hebrew too, but and it's not, it's like, I don't know, especially numbers, like ages or years of a king's reign, or numbers of people. Numbers is often there's textual, especially we're talking about the Old Testament.
Yeah.
The height of Goliath, that's also a number, right? But otherwise, I mean, so significant textual variant would be like the Samaritan Pentateuch intentionally tampering with the location for the temple, right? And that's theologically driven for them. Okay, so the Septuagint doesn't have Mount Gerizim; it's Mount Moriah, as does the Masoretic text, and I'm not sure what specifically. I'd have to check in the Dead Sea Scrolls if we have a portion there. But otherwise, anything we have is basically the same. I mean, it's with very minor things here and there. Like the stories are basically the same. The numbers are different, but we do have these like little things here and there that are different, especially especially the translations. You have different ancient Greek. It's not just like one Septuagint. There were different Greek translations. There were also different Aramaic translations. Some more literal, like the ESV or NASB, and more, toward paraphrase and stuff like that. Anyway, as I was thinking about all of these you've got textual variants and you've got the variations in the way they translated text in different languages, all different languages. How did they get to they have to all be uniform, right? And yet there are still some variants. So how would you, I'm trying to think how to phrase it. Like you need to change all of these things and you got to change it in all the translations too. That would be like the second scenario. The third scenario with the Medina Torah, like they corrupted the stories and stuff before, and then yet you still have some differences, and not really in the stories much, but in translations and copying things later on. I don't know. Maybe I'm not making sense.
It's just proof that there is never been unified committee of the preservation of the Torah.
Yeah, that's what I'm. Yeah, that's really the point. Is you can't there's no centralized authority. There's no way to check.
There are 1,000 differences.
How do you keep it uniform?
Yeah, you can't.
Yeah,
but yet Muslims insist. Oh yeah, you did. You corrupted exactly the same. But if I'm making copy of the one Torah changing to another one, I will change all minor differences as well. Why not?
Right. Especially because the whole tampering scheme that supposedly started it was about all sorts of minor things that didn't seem to matter.
Oh yeah.
So yet you still have minor differences between them all over the place.
And they are preserved.
Which have been, and they're preserved.
So it means it's never been global Torah change conspiracy, ever.
Yeah, you have to have a perfect preservation of the non-preserved text.
Yeah, that's right. Perfect preservation of non-preserved text of the Torah.
Because the whole premise is that it's not it's not so well preserved, right? It's tampered all over the place, and yet it's so really uniform wherever you go, in any language, anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. Medina Torah seems so crazy too, because you need to have this faithful community. Yeah, okay, you're saying that the last generation, why would they? I mean, I don't. To me, it just doesn't make any sense. And they had to have moved down to Medina before.
It's in this.
Otherwise, then you'd have that. Otherwise, you have to have competing texts in Israel.
Yeah, they have to move as a rebellious act. Well, it's actually it should happen before even Greeks show up.
Yeah.
When Greeks show up, like 200 BC, 150 BC, something. And then Romans show up like 60.
Honestly, I think you need to put it back in like the Babylonian exile.
Maybe,
but even that's too early though, because you've got texts that are written after that.
Yeah, but what I was thinking is like you have
even the Hebrew script was developed in the Babylonian exile. They took it from Aramaic. The block script, it was written differently before. Yeah, it's crazy. It's just insanity.
So moving into that place to keep it preservation and then change it everything or just abandon it and walk away saying, okay, our ancestor did wrong stuff, which they knew it was not wrong. Yeah, it is bizarre.
The amazing thing is it's this one place, just one place has it.
Well, I tell you,
no trace of it anywhere.
nowhere.
Even when you have all of these different, you have these different sects that are so against each other in the Jewish and then Christian communities. The Samaritans is the big one, right? I think because
that's for sure. Yeah,
here you actually have a clear divergence.
The Muslims say that the Jews, and they asked me last night, do you know why the Jews move into Arabia? Because they expect the prophet to come, which we'll find it in their books. I said, no, because Arabia, it was the only place run by pagans, which relatively freedom of religion running still, when Jews were hiding from Byzantine Christians, from persecution.
Right.
That's only place they came because normal polytheistic society, they're more plurality of opinions.
Yeah.
They've been more, and as a matter of fact, we know history of the Jews trying to establish a kingdom in northern Yemen, Najran. They overcome Christian city of Najran at that time, kill a lot of people, establish a kingdom. But then Abyssinian king sent the troops from Africa and they obliterate the Jewish state of Najran. It was just happened before, I think, some years before Muhammad was born. So it was an interesting story. So now we're talking about only a certain area of Hijaz, the Central Arabia. Then the Jews felt a little bit comfortable living among the Arabs because nobody really bothered them. It was only like regular dispute of, like no religious dispute at that time, right? Because everywhere else, there were Christians around them. So the Jews felt uncomfortable to live in the Roman Empire under the Christian rules because there was a persecution of any sort. So they moved down there. But Muslims insist, no, they move because they anticipate the Prophet to come. And then supposedly, if that's correct, the certain group of Jews decided to meet the Prophet and they moved to Yathrib. Why they didn't go to Mecca? Because Mecca was mentioned as one when the Prophet will arise. No Jews were living in Mecca, as far as I know. So the Jews lived in Khaybar, 100% Jewish population.
Maybe they did. I don't know. I mean, I've heard different things.
Well, I heard none of them did, right?
I've heard that, and then I've heard otherwise. I don't know.
Yeah. The reason I'm saying that, because if you remember last video about the Muhammad talking to the Jewish guy and said, like, did you find me written in your book? He said, we find somebody like you from the place you've been brought up, but we'll look closely. Well, we're afraid that it will be you, but when we look closely, we find it's not you. He said, like, why?
70,000.
70,000 of going to the paradise without judgment. So, wait a minute. If you expect somebody to come from Mecca, but you have no Jewish population in Mecca, how you expect them to be your kind? So if you have no group of Muslims living, Jews living in Mecca as a like a block, like a tribe. There's no tribe in Mecca of the Jewish. Maybe there is one guy here, one guy there, maybe, but not like a tribe of Banu Qurayza, Banu Kainuka. There's nothing like that in the Mecca. So how come you live in Yathrib, you anticipate somebody from come to Mecca one day, but you didn't establish Jewish population there, as like waiting for this guy to be born among you. So how you can anticipate he will come from a Mecca where there's no Jews, but being Jewish, and you get upset that he's not Jewish?
Right, exactly, yeah.
Like, it doesn't make sense. You don't have a Jewish population, so you still expect somebody from Mecca, and you're upset he's not Jewish. How come? Well, because you never have a Jewish population there. What do you expect, right? So it means, again, there's a problem, logical problem. So the Muslims superimpose on the Jews, saying they knew he's coming from Mecca. It's written in the Torah that he come from Mecca, but because he's not Jew, he's Arab, they deny him. Well, his Arab ancestry definitely play with the denial, but from different angle.
Thought of another thing. Abdullah ibn Salam had the pure Torah, right?
Yeah.
Why didn't he keep it?
Mm-hmm. Well,
he's supposed to be saying Muhammad's here.
He's supposed to use it as a foundation.
Right. But wouldn't they keep it as evidence?
It should be.
Right? That's the only logical thing. You're going to let all the other corrupt Jews take all the Torahs?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Muhammad, did he have power? Wouldn't he be like, say, like, let's keep a copy?
Oh, yeah, he could do that.
Of course. And Abdullah bin Salam was supposed, according to Islamic tradition, he was the head rabbi in Medina.
Yeah. So he could have done that.
Now, the rest of the Jewish community turned on him when he converted, but what? The head rabbi plus Muhammad wouldn't be able to keep a copy of the Torah?
You know, that was funny, interesting, because the story of Abdullah ibn Salam, like, it's abruptly stopped at a certain place. We don't find anywhere he's anywhere. I don't remember mention Abdullah ibn Salam extensively after that incident of him accepting Islam.
He's in some hadith about, but just, yeah, I don't know the timing of it, but his name comes up in different places, but not.
Is it but we're talking about, is it the same year?
I don't know.
Or it's like spread out for so many.
I would have assumed it was spread out somewhat, but I don't know. Okay. I'm just thinking though, like, basically the function, the relevance of Abdullah ibn Salam is he is testimony.
Yep, living testimony.
He's key testimony. He's the scholar among the people of Israel. He's the people of the book. He's
like Nicodemus.
Yeah, and he didn't keep the receipt.
The most important part.
And it's not
I
like,
tell you why, because he didn't have a lamination machine. He couldn't laminate the Torah scroll to be preserved, and it's get deteriorated over time.
God couldn't preserve it, right?
Yeah. Well, God could, but Allah didn't. So anyway,
it's enough that Allah leaves all the corrupted versions.
Yeah, he preserved all corrupted versions, so to speak. Mm-hmm. Now, Muslims have no trace of Medinan Torah, which is their only manuscripted evidence to prove that it would have been different from any other Torahs. So they should have it, but they don't have it. Meanwhile, all ancient Torahs, as you just mentioned, Torah manuscripts, since the 3rd century BC to the 5th century AD, prove that our modern Torah has not been corrupted for over 2,000 years, and virtually the same as Septuagint and the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? So somehow we have, God preserved all other Torahs, but Allah didn't preserve his Torah. So the Muslims, now, instead of spending money on building new mosques and printing new Qur'ans, should use the money to hire all archaeologists on the planet and conduct archaeological digs in Arabia in order to find that Medinan Torah. The one and only proof of Islam to be the third Abrahamic religion. And this Medinan Torah must be written before the birth of Muhammad, have the name and description of Muhammad in it, and have stories of prophets similar to the ones in the Quran. So that's my...
it's got to be in Hebrew too.
Well, yeah, absolutely. It should be in Hebrew because it's predates Muhammad, and it's basically the time of Dead Sea Scrolls. So far, if you don't find it, your Quran is sinking as after the meeting the Torah. Torah is it's our iceberg, and Quran is Titanic. So it had no way to stay afloat. So, and it's funny because I talk to Muslims and tell the Muslims, please find the Torah, Medinan Torah, just for your sake, just for you to sleep, even at night, well, right? So not to be bothered by conscience. But it seems like nobody cares about it. Nobody. I never heard anybody trying to conduct any digs to find the Medinan Torah, to support their own religion. It's like... I don't know, the flat earthers, I will tell guys, you have to go around in Antarctica to find out if it's Earth flat or round. It just simply make a timing of your going around, right? So around this Antarctic, which like take a few months or a few years, I don't know, on the sail or the boat, whatever kind, right? So do something about it. Just don't say that the Earth is flat. Don't prove it, because there is only one way to disprove the Earth is like a bowl shape. You have to take that journey. And why don't do that?
Right.
So same thing for the Muslims. Could you please try to find the Torah to support your claim? Otherwise, we'll look at you, we'll laugh at you, saying like you have no evidence whatsoever. All evidence is your just baseless claim that Torah been corrupted by the Jews. All right. Like, is it enough for you to go to sleep well at night? Well, I'm sorry to hear that, because that's not gonna work out at the day of judgment for you. So that's why my honest advice for you: go and find the Torah in Hebrew with the name of Muhammad in it, predates the birth of Muhammad, and with the stories of Prophet as is in the Quran. Otherwise, your Quran had the faith of Titanic. Okay. I think we can end our video, and we see you next time. Thank you for watching.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you. Bye-bye.